Some people don't post their photos because their identity is not something they feel the need to display. For them, the self is not a performance, but a lived experience. In a culture that constantly asks, "Who are you online?" they answer a different question instead. Who am I when no one is watching? This reflects a psychological orientation toward inner definition rather than outer confirmation. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the process of becoming oneself, not in the eyes of the crowd, but in dialogue with the inner world. These individuals sense, often intuitively, that the more the self is shaped by public reaction, the further it drifts from authenticity. They understand that identity matures in silence, through reflection, struggle, and private meaning. By not posting, they preserve a space where the self can evolve without interruption or comparison. Their worth is measured internally, not tallied in likes. This doesn't mean they reject society. It means they refuse to let society define them. They live first, interpret later, and share only when it feels truthful rather than strategic. When identity is lived instead of displayed, it becomes stable, resilient, and deeply personal. And that raises a quiet but powerful question. Are you shaping your life for visibility or for truth? For many people, not posting photos is not about fear or insecurity, but about boundaries. They sense, often without putting it into words, that constant exposure slowly erodes something essential. In Jungian terms, the psyche needs protected space to remain whole. When every moment is offered to public consumption, the inner life becomes fragmented, pulled outward, shaped by reaction instead of reflection. Choosing privacy, then, becomes an act of psychological self-respect. These individuals understand that intimacy loses depth when it is made visible to everyone. They know that some experiences gain meaning precisely because they are held, not displayed. By keeping parts of their lives offline, they preserve emotional clarity and autonomy. This is not withdrawal, it is discernment. They decide what deserves witness and what deserves silence. In a world that equates openness with honesty, they recognize that true honesty often begins in private, where the self can speak without distortion. Privacy, in this sense, is not secrecy, but sovereignty. It is the ability to say, "This part of me is not for public negotiation." And when a person learns to protect their inner world, they begin to live with greater intention, depth, and freedom. The question, then, is simple but unsettling. What parts of your life are you protecting? And what parts have you given away without noticing? Another reason some people don't post their photos is that they are not subjected to the constant need for validation. They have learned, consciously or not, that approval is a fragile foundation on which to build a self. Jung warned that when the ego becomes dependent on external affirmation, it loses contact with the deeper psyche. Likes, comments, and digital praise offer quick reassurance, but they also create quiet dependency. The self begins to ask permission before it feels worthy. Those who step away from this cycle often experience a different kind of freedom. Their confidence is not refreshed by attention, nor threatened by absence. They can move through the world without constantly checking how they are being perceived. This psychological independence allows emotions to settle and decisions to be guided by inner values rather than social reward. They are less reactive, more centered, and more resilient when faced with disapproval. This does not mean they are immune to doubt. It means they no longer outsource their self-worth. They understand that validation can be pleasant, but it cannot be essential. When approval is no longer required, authenticity becomes possible. And that leads to a final reflection worth sitting with. If no one were watching, liking, or applauding, would you still live the same way? Or would you finally become yourself? When people choose not to place themselves at the center of attention, they often become more attentive to others. By stepping out of constant self-presentation, their awareness turns outward in a different way, not to seek approval, but to understand. Jung believed that much of human behavior is driven by unconscious motives, and those who observe more than they display tend to recognize these patterns with unusual clarity. They notice tone, timing, contradictions, and what is left unsaid. While others are busy curating an image, they are reading the room. This quiet observational stance deepens emotional intelligence. Instead of defining themselves through reaction, they study how validation shapes behavior, how insecurity seeks applause, and how confidence reveals itself without noise. Over time, this makes them less easily manipulated and more psychologically grounded. They understand that what people show online is often a mask, not a mirror. And because they are not invested in maintaining their own digital mask, they can see through others with greater accuracy. This capacity to observe without performing creates inner stability. It allows relationships to be approached with discernment rather than illusion. And it leads to a simple but unsettling insight. The more you watch instead of display, the more you understand, and understanding, once gained, quietly changes the way you live. There is also a quiet power in choosing how much of yourself is known. When people don't post their photos, they are often exercising control over their personal narrative. Jung understood that the psyche is vulnerable when it is overly exposed. What is constantly revealed becomes easily categorized, judged, and misunderstood. By remaining partially unseen, these individuals protect themselves from being reduced to an image or a moment frozen in time. They recognize that mystery is not deception, it is depth. When everything is visible, nothing invites curiosity. By limiting what they reveal, they decide how and when they are understood. This gives them psychological leverage. Others cannot easily project assumptions onto a blank space. Their identity remains fluid, evolving, and resistant to labels. In a culture that rushes to define, this restraint becomes a form of autonomy. Control over one's narrative also reduces emotional vulnerability to misinterpretation. When fewer pieces are exposed, fewer pieces can be distorted. This does not mean withdrawal from connection, but a selective approach to it. They choose presence over exposure, meaning over spectacle. And that leaves us with a question worth carrying forward. Are you telling your story intentionally, or are you letting the world write it for you, one image at a time? At the deepest level, this pattern reflects a form of confidence that does not ask to be seen. People who avoid posting their photos are often grounded in a quiet self-assurance that doesn't need demonstration. Jung distinguished between the persona, the mask we show the world, and the true self that exists beneath it. When confidence is performative, it relies on reinforcement. When it is internal, It remains steady whether it is noticed or not. These individuals are not trying to prove who they are too occupied being it. Their sense of worth comes from coherence between inner values and outward actions, not from admiration. This gives them emotional stability. They are less shaken by comparison, less reactive to judgment, and more capable of standing alone when necessary. Silence, for them, is not absence but alignment. By not constantly presenting an image, they avoid confusing attention with meaning. This kind of confidence matures slowly. It is built through self-reflection, responsibility, and acceptance of one's contradictions. It does not shine loudly, but it endures. And perhaps that is the most unsettling realization of all. The strongest confidence is often invisible. So ask yourself, not how you appear, but how firmly you stand when no one is looking. And let that answer guide how you live.